Welcome to Focus's Day of Mission, Prayer, and Giving. Excited to have a little bit of time to talk about servant leadership this morning with you as we aim to help our supporters deepen their faith, encounter our Lord more deeply, and come to know His plan for their lives, as well as to come to understand how His teachings can transform their families, their parishes, and their workplaces. This morning, I have with me my good friend, Nathan Stanley. He is the Senior Director of Talent and Leadership Development for Focus, the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. He collaborates with the executive team and departments to hire and onboard the highest quality staff, as well as their ongoing leadership development. For over 15 years, he's provided training and catechesis on evangelization, discipleship, leadership, organizational culture, and strategy to young people, parish staff, and clergy throughout the country. He does it all, people. He inspires and equips missionary disciples throughout the United States and is dedicated to raising up the next generation of Catholic leaders for the church and society. He encountered Jesus in 2000, way back at Benedictine College, but I think maybe the most spectacular thing about Nathan is he married Lauren, who is amazing, and they have adopted 3 amazing children as well. So Nathan, welcome this morning. Glad to be with you.
Thanks, Mark. Excited to be here.
Excellent. Well, talk to me a little bit about your work within talent and leadership development for Focus, and what are some of the things that you're most excited about what you're doing right now?
Well, I think the first thing is, Mark, we work with incredible young people that, first of all, they're just radical in the way they live their lives and the yes that they make initially. They're signing up to be missionaries. Many of them are saying, hey, I'll move anywhere in the country. I'll raise my own salary. And I'm ready to just live radically for our Lord. And so when you have that kind of willingness already, my work becomes very fun, because it's really, how do you imitate Jesus as a leader today? How do we dive deeply into that relationship with Jesus and lead in a way that He is, that I can be a light in the midst of the current darkness?
That's fantastic. So, one of the things I was really hoping to talk to you about this morning is servant leadership. I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about servant leadership over the last, decade, 2 decades, maybe longer, but it might be a little bit of an unknown concept from the heart of the church that doesn't necessarily permeate into the midst of the world. Nathan, would you just mind sharing for a few minutes, what is servant leadership?
No, I love this conversation. It's something you and I are both passionate about. And I think the way I like to first start, usually when I give talks on servant leadership, I just ask, what are the impressions of servant leadership? And there's this, the initial impression people have is it's kind of a nice way of leading. It's this like, oh, okay, I'm just going to lead the way the world does, but I'm going to do it a little nicer than everyone else. And so, and that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about servant leadership. We're talking about this radical idea of following Jesus in the way that He led. And I think I like to pull in 2 scripture verses that really talk about this. The first is Matthew 20, 25, 26. And this is where, 2 of the disciples have went to Jesus. They've said, hey, we want the highest honors. We want to be with you, right next to you when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus says to them, hey, can you drink the chalice that I can drink? And eventually he bowls all the other disciples in as they're arguing about who's the greatest. He says, we will not lord it over our authority over others as the Gentiles do. That's not what I mean. But the greatest among you will serve. The greatest among you will serve. So this is a radical call to be different than the world in a lot of ways in the way that we lead. Not to lord over our authority, but to serve. So that's the first. The other one I like is from St. Paul. St. Paul in Philippians 2, he talks deeply about what it is that God came to do in Jesus Christ. And he says, he reminds the followers of Jesus at that time, the early Christian community, he says, do nothing from selfishness or conceit, but in humility count others better than yourselves. Let each of you not look to their own interest, but to the interest of others. Have this mind among you, which was the mind of Christ, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant. And I think how much of this, how do we take on that mind of Christ to be like him in that, hey, I'm going to lower myself down to serve the people so I can pick them back up, to accompany them. And then truly, I love that word, emptied. Emptying ourselves out. I'm gonna become a self-gift of myself to those that I lead. So yeah, I think these verses are foundational in the radical nature of what it is to be a servant leader.
That's really beautiful. Just that thought of being a self-gift, and when we find ourselves in some position or opportunity of leadership, to really kind of apply that and to be a self-gift to those that are put in. But this is, I mean, who's this for? Is this for people who are in positions of authority, or is this for, who is servant leadership really for?
Yeah, there's a guy here in Denver who locally wrote a book. You don't need a title to be a leader, and the book's pretty good, but the title says everything. The idea is that leadership is truly for everyone. It's not something that I need to be running a big corporation, or I need to have a big team, or I need to have a bunch of people reporting to me. But leadership is something that is more deeper than that. It's about influence, and in the Christian context, it's influence towards the good. It's influence towards the gospel. And often we think we can influence by forcing or saying, hey, I have this position, so therefore it is. But usually that doesn't work. Where influence matters more is in relationship. It's in character and in integrity, and the fact that a person knows that you're walking with them. Influence has got to be way more impactful there.
That's outstanding. So it doesn't take a position or a title in order to be a leader, and so we find ourselves in those positions where we have an opportunity to influence others. And servant leadership enables us to look at it with Christ's lens as we make ourselves a gift to them.
Absolutely,
that's amazing. Could you talk just for a minute, Nathan, about what servant leadership means specifically we're a fairly large mission apostolate. What does it mean for us as we think about developing leaders and launching leaders into our organization as well as beyond our organization?
Yeah, and I like to come back to kind of three core concepts as we're building servant leaders. The first is relationship. It's about who do you belong to? If you belong to Jesus Christ, and you belong to God, that's going to impact the way you lead. So developing that prayer life, that day-to-day, just talking with Jesus about what's going on in a very ordinary way, and having that relationship, which therefore, if we imitate that, we're going to live that way in our leadership with others. We're going to build relationships with them and friendships with them as we lead them. And so we spend time teaching friendship and how do you build relationships and human skills on good communication and listening and all these ways that you can dive in there that deepen relationship, right? Another aspect of this is who are you becoming, right? Who you are is more important than what you do. And so your character means a lot. So the growth in virtue that a person has. And I love the definition of virtue from the Catechism in 1803. It says it's a habitual disposition to do the good. As you continue to read it, it says that's lived out in concrete actions. And so it's about how do I have habitual dispositions to be courageous or prudent or have self-control, but I live that out in a concrete everyday situation. And so we'll go through. Here's the situations. As you're living in a team of missionaries, or you're leading a department here at our support center. What are the concrete situations that you're going to have to apply character to? And then finally, back to that self-gift piece is that it's as a good spiritual director once told me, it's not about you, Nathan. It's about the others. And so the idea is like how do I live for others? Which means that sometimes I need to change my unique way of leading that is my natural inclination. We all have natural inclinations, but in order to better serve the other, I need to probably change the way that I would lead in order to meet their needs.
That's outstanding. That's outstanding. And I'm sure that there are ways in which what you're learning and doing within your work at Focus that you find it translating into other parts of your life as well. What are some of the insights that you've taken from your study and training in servant leadership, and how do you see that applying into other areas of your life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's what I love about it is that it can apply to anything. So one of the models that we use, or frameworks that we use here at Focus, is Ken Blanchard's situational leadership model, where he walks you through different stages of development as a person learns a skill or it has a new experience, and that can be applied to anything. In fact, yesterday I was just speaking with a friend of mine who works in the oil and gas business up in North Dakota, and he's trying to learn how to motivate a new staff member. And as he did this, I walked him through the situational leadership model. And when we got to it, he goes, "Oh yeah, I just don't lead that way." But you're right. This person needs more direction, more support. I'm just all direction all the time, or I'm just no direction all the time. And so it takes work to do that. So it's funny how it can be applied in almost any industry. The same is true with raising our kids, as our kids are learning, they're young, so they're still learning like, oh, I got to do homework after school sometimes. And sometimes they're not motivated. So you got to be you have to give them more direction and more encouragement in those moments. Sometimes they're really motivating, just got to let them run. And so you're changing the way. And then what I realize is that, man, my son is so much different than my daughter. In so many ways, my 5-year-old, when they approach the way they approach. So I actually have to lead them differently.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it seems like it really kind of permeates into every part of life. And it makes me think, maybe this is odd, but it makes me think a little bit about St. Paul saying, pray ceaselessly. What role does prayer play, do you think? What role does prayer play in helping people to grow in servant leadership? How does it permeate their leadership? What would you recommend to somebody in terms of?
Oh, that's great. Prayer, I think, is always in the first place, right? There's action always comes after prayer. And I remember when I was a missionary at the University of Wisconsin, and I had this team I was working with. They were all young. I was young. I was a very young and new leader, and they were younger than me. And I remember it was actually very difficult for me to work with that group at first. Even though they were great people, they were awesome in so many ways, but I didn't know how to lead them. And so I decided to do something where every night before I went to bed, I just thanked God for them by name, each by name, and then I asked God to just help me to leverage their gifts for the sake of the gospel on that campus. And so that prayer actually was the first step to changing my heart. In fact, all those people are very good friends with me now, and we have a great relationship many years down the line. But I wouldn't have known that in the moment unless I would have turned to God and asked Him, "Hey, guide me. Tell me why you put these people in my lives. There's obviously a reason for that." So prayer is the first place, and praying for our people by name is a great way of doing that. It also permeates all of this. It permeates all of our efforts, all of our work. And like you said, St. Paul says, prayer unceasingly. So when we go and we strive to put Christ at the center of everything that we do, we actually are offering our work as a prayer, and that overflows in there.
Oh, that's outstanding. I know you and I have talked, we've worked closely together for decades now. One of the things that I consistently hear you talk about is when you're approaching maybe a sensitive conversation or a difficult conversation, you mentioned the other person's guardian angel. Can you talk just for a minute about what role do you see guardian angels play in servant leadership? I think that's a beautiful example of one of the ways that you live as a servant leader, Nathan.
Oh, that's great. That's great. What I love about the guardian angels is the church teaches we all have one. And so if we all have one, they're actually all on the same side. And the side is about getting souls to heaven. They want us to get to heaven. They want the people we're talking to get to heaven. And so when we're walking into a sensitive conversation, it's good not just to ask our guardian angel for help, but to greet the guardian angel of the other person, to actually say, can you help me here? I also do this a lot with my kids, and I'm sure my wife does it a lot for me. But praying for our guardian angels of our families can maybe help bring some extra peace in our own homes as well. Or when you're just not sure what to do, you're able to reach out and say, guardian angel, help. There's much more supernatural reality here to the way that we're leading and engaging with others.
That's awesome. It's something that every time I hear you say it, I'm like, I got to do that. And I forget so easily. I get so caught up in the moment. It's difficult for me to remember those things. But I love that idea of putting prayer really at the forefront of everything we're doing, especially in those interactions that we have. Maybe it's a difficult circumstance or somebody who needs to be kind of redirected or reprimanded, and to be able to first and foremost go to their guardian angel and kind of ask them to open their heart to be able to, I just have to get better at doing that and asking our guardian angels to intercede. And I think about that. I got a lot of kids, and so every time we're in the car, I sometimes think about how many angels are with us in the vehicle as well.
That's right. Yeah. No. I've been trying to get into practice, Mark. When I
obviously,
go home,
it's not just an idea. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries. Mark. When I try to get into when I drive home, what the goal is when I pull in the garage is I greet the guardian angels of the family, and because you never know what's going on the other side. Just because life is crazy for young families.
Yeah, amazing. So obviously, based on what you've been talking about, we're not talking about servant leadership as just an idea. It's actually a skill, a practiced virtue, something that you can grow in. Would you just be willing to share off the top of your head some practical approaches to growing in and living as a servant leader?
Yeah, I think this is great, Mark, because it's really easy to sometimes just hear information and be like, oh, that's a great idea. We'll hear you out more on this. It's like the people of Athens when St. Paul talked about the unknown God. They're like, oh, that's really interesting. And many of them walked away. He got a few followers out of that. But to really apply these principles to our lives, I like how Stephen Covey puts it in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He says that it should be first and foremost, an inside-out approach. So it starts with private victories first. It starts with, how do we, thinking about how do we think about others? What's some of the self-talk in our head? Is it like, oh, do we have this language of the if-onlys? If only, I was in a better parish, or if only, we weren't so busy as a family. If only my team was more trained. And if we could start to transform that from if only to what can I do with this situation? What am I able to do still, knowing that I just need to act and God will steer it. I heard a story recently of a president of a college who wears a lapel pin, who has it has a what do they call those bikes where there's 2 seats? The
tandem bikes.
The tandem bikes, yeah. So it has those tandem bikes. He's like, I used to always think that I was riding a bicycle and I'm just pedaling as hard and I'm steering and I just got to keep working. But he's like, I realized actually I'm on a tandem bicycle where I am pedaling, but God's up front steering things, right? So we still got to put in all the effort, but God has to steer it all. God's got to steer those efforts, and He'll bless what He wants. So that's the first. Some other ways to think about it is just having a growth mindset about ourselves and our growth, like that failure's okay. Failure is actually a great way to learn, right? When our kids are learning to walk, we don't discourage them when they take their first steps and fall. We actually praise them, and we actually get excited for them because that attempt, even though it ended in failure, was an amazing effort in order for them to learn to walk. Same thing, going to a baseball game, you'd rather see the guy strike out swinging than the ball go past. The effort of trying to hit the ball always seems to be a little bit more than that. So giving our best effort and then leaving results up to God. And then also having a growth mindset about others. People can change. We can easily fix our mindsets on the fact that the people that we're working with or the community members we're there, they've got to be like this forever. There can't be anything more anti-gospel than that because we are all about every individual is called to conversion. And so if we're called to conversion, we're called to deepening. A few other things is spend time listening, right? How do we really encounter people and listen? Something Pope Francis has talked a lot about, and really to live this element of encounter as well with people, and diving in and understanding where a person comes from, so that we can draw them back to the truth. We can draw them there. It's I think Covey put it: you need to diagnose before you prescribe. It would be horrible to get the wrong prescription because you just decided to give advice before you listened. There's lots of other things. Encourage people often. How do we encourage people and really have that positive attitude? In Focus, we talk about we want to be more like a thermostat than a thermometer. We can actually walk in a room, and by smiling and being upbeat and encouraging, we change the temperature of the room. And when you do that, people want to be around you. Usually people don't want to be around people that are a little bit more pessimistic or struggling to just be more critical of everything. Now, if there's a time for correction, there is, but correct gently, as St. Paul says. We got to correct gently and really redirect people there. And then I just say take time to grow. It's tough to find time to grow. But, as I was talking to my friend in the oil and gas company, he's like, I'm working with people that just don't read. So I don't know if I'm going to get them to read this book. And I said, well, would you guys watch a TED Talk together, or would you do this together, and there's so many other ways to learn and grow today that depending what your situation is, what your season of life is, maybe a podcast or a YouTube video or a TED Talk would be better than reading a full book. And even though there may be depth in the book and get some of the stories out of it, we're reading just a blog post. But find ways to continue growing and taking care of yourself so that you can give yourself to others. So,
yeah, I like that. A lot of great suggestions within that, but probably the underlying component that goes into all of it is kind of never stop taking responsibility for growing yourself personally, professionally, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. All of those things you have to take the primary responsibility. Your boss isn't going to grow you. You have to choose to do it yourself. And even if your boss told you, hey, go read this, do this, if you don't open yourself and put yourself into that, you're not going to be growing. You have to be open to being influenced by other things so you can continue to grow within that as well. That's fantastic, Nathan. Let me just close with this one question. What do you think is the hoped for impact within the world, the culture, our society of people who are truly living lives as servant leaders? This is totally speculative, but obviously we've made a significant investment as a mission here within Focus to imparting servant leadership into all of our staff. What do you think we would hope to see or are even beginning to see from people living as servant leaders?
That's a great question, Mark. I was talking to one of our alumni recently who's become a leader in a pretty large marketing firm within a larger organization. And he told me that, my goal I always thought was, get some skills out in the world and then come back and serve a nonprofit. It's like, but the more time I spend here, the more influence I see that I can have, not necessarily for himself, but for the gospel. And he says, in a certain sense, he's able to use that area of servant leadership as a platform to have deeper conversations about his faith with people. And then he's seeing an impact of people actually being curious and interested and even some converting because he's showing up being a good professional but even more so founded upon these principles of servant leadership, imitating Jesus Christ, and able to share that with his colleagues in a very natural, normal way, not in a weird way, but just a way that relates as a brother to brother, but they can see that he has some joy, see that he has something that they don't have in this world. And he's courageous enough to share that with them. So I see that as that story played out, millions of times throughout the world. And I think, in a lot of ways, a friend of mine, he mentions that, we all have a purpose that only God has given us. And sometimes when we hear that, we think, oh, that purpose is giant. I need to go quit my job, start speaking to thousands of people, millions of people, or do something that's got to create this company that will go global. And that actually may be true for many people. But there's a balance of that between, yes, God has a purpose and it's unique and it's actually thought out from all of time for each and every person. And there's a balance between that and St. Therese, who her purpose and her meaning and her life was lived in a convent, living the little way and loving every person and bringing God into every single moment, sanctifying every single moment, which ended up also transforming the world. And so we need to pray about, what is God calling us about as a servant leader in my little piece of the world, piece of the world, which just may be my family for now, or my neighbors, my parish, my local community, because that's if we set little fires everywhere, the Lord will set the world on fire through that love.
That is spectacular. I would love to see that vision realized through servant leadership. And I'm really grateful, Nathan, to you for spending a little time with me this morning talking about servant leadership and some of the implications that it has, as well as some practical approaches for how someone can seek to cultivate the virtue of servant leadership and really kind of live more in that image and likeness of our Lord in the way that we influence and impact others. So thank you very much for your time this morning. Really glad to have had the opportunity to talk to you.
My pleasure, Mark. Thanks for having me.